At the Christmas dinner table, my grandfather slammed his hand down. I, Tabitha Lyons, froze with a forkful of turkey halfway to my mouth. His words cut through the room, silencing everyone. The table had been lively moments earlier, laughter, clinking glasses, the smell of roasted turkey and gingerbread. My grandfather, Sidney, just back from a long business trip, sat at the head of the table. Then, suddenly, his palm hit the wood, making every wine glass vibrate. He looked directly at me and asked sharply, "Why is a stranger running the cold storage and logistics company in Texas that I purchased and put in your name 4 years ago?" I lowered my fork slowly, eyes wide in shock, heart racing. "Grandpa, what are you talking about? I don't even have money in my name. How could I own a company?" Silence fell. My dad's knuckles whitened around the carving knife. My mom's face went pale. My younger brother and his wife exchanged nervous glances. No one spoke. Grandpa leaned forward and explained that a few weeks earlier, an old business partner had mistakenly called him, thinking he was still involved. The partner had congratulated him on the new owner, David Carter, now fully in charge of the company. "David Carter? I've never even heard that name before," I said quietly, keeping my tone soft while watching their reactions. The tension in the room was thick. Then, unexpectedly, the police arrived. Have you ever been betrayed by the people closest to you? The ones you trusted most? Share your story in the comments. I read every one and want to hear where you're from and what happened. To find out what happens next, like the video and turn on notifications for part 2. The family remained frozen. Grandpa Sidney pulled a thick folder of tax documents from his briefcase, the ones the business partner had emailed by mistake. He slid it across the table, pointing to the line showing David Carter as the current primary owner. My brother Knox leaned forward, face flushed, scanning the papers. "It must be a mistake. Maybe another company with a similar name," he said, his voice higher than usual. Mom gently placed her hand on Grandpa's arm. "You must be tired from the flight and time changes," she said, smiling too broadly to redirect the conversation. Dad Barry nodded while carving another slice of turkey, suggesting that tonight was Christmas, a time for family, not business disputes. I let my confusion show, speaking softly. I described the past 4 years, struggling after college in a small rundown Houston apartment, surviving on instant noodles and cheap vegetables. One Christmas, I'd bought only a small box of off-brand cookies wrapped in newspaper because I couldn't afford gift paper. Looking around the table, I asked why no one had ever mentioned the company to me if it was really mine. My voice carried a mix of hurt and surprise. Grandpa continued, explaining the mistaken call and how David Carter was now expanding the warehouse facilities and securing new contracts for frozen goods transport across Texas. Knox muttered something about cross-communications in business. Tegan stayed quiet, focusing on her plate. Mom glanced at Dad, who suggested dessert to lighten the mood. I pressed further, asking if the partner had mentioned anything specific about the ownership change. Grandpa detailed upgrades to refrigeration units and new trucking routes boosting profits. The festive light suddenly felt out of place against the tension. Dad tried to change the subject, commenting on the pie, but the words fell flat. Knox avoided eye contact, staring at the papers. Mom's hand trembled slightly as she poured water. I leaned back, arms folded, keeping calm deliberately. The denials were vague and layered over each other without real explanation. Grandpa didn't push, letting the documents speak for themselves. The room remained tense, everyone waiting for someone else to break the silence. Forks scraped plates occasionally, but no one ate. Dad sighed, placing the carving knife beside his plate. He reminded us that 4 years ago, right after I graduated, Grandpa had placed the entire cold storage and logistics company in my name. At 22, with no business experience, running a company that size could have led to costly mistakes or even the loss of the asset. The family had stepped in temporarily to manage day-to-day operations, shielding me from risk until I was prepared. Mom explained their concern. Unscrupulous partners or poor decisions could have jeopardized the company, even causing bankruptcy. Their actions, she insisted, were purely protective to safeguard Grandpa's gift for my future. Knox nodded, calling it a collective family decision. Tegan remained quiet, fork idle, avoiding the tension. I let the hurt show, brow furrowed, and asked, voice thick with emotion, what temporary management had actually entailed. Had they made decisions without consulting me? Why exclude me entirely if the intent was protection? Dad reassured me that their involvement had been limited to routine oversight, maintaining contracts, paying vendors, and reinvesting profits. He emphasized that nothing was permanent and control would return whenever I felt ready. Mom added that they avoided involving me to prevent additional stress during my transition to independence. Knox explained they monitored performance closely, ensuring steady growth without complications. Grandpa shook his head calmly, gesturing to the documents again, pointing out that filings indicated a complete ownership transfer, not a temporary guardianship or trust. Dad suggested it might reflect administrative updates for tax purposes that didn't alter family control. Mom agreed, noting that LLC structures sometimes required formal adjustments for liability reasons. I asked softly how those adjustments resulted in David Carter being listed as primary owner if the company remained family-held. My tone conveyed confusion and hurt. Knox dismissed it as a likely clerical error, common in Texas filings when multiple members exist. Tegan shifted but remained silent, fidgeting with her napkin. Mom emphasized their continued oversight, promising full transparency soon. Dad proposed discussing it after the holidays, when emotions ran lower. Grandpa countered quietly, noting that official records showed an outright transfer, not shared membership or proxy. Sweat appeared on Dad's temple. Mom's reassuring smile wavered, and Knox rubbed his neck uneasily. Excuses overlapped, technicalities, misunderstandings, protective measures, but no one admitted any sale. I observed each glance, each raised voice, noting how the festive atmosphere had completely vanished. Plates remained mostly untouched, conversations circling defensively, with vague assurances of temporary intent and eventual handover. Tension steadily increased. Grandpa finished pointing out the ownership transfer and asked Knox directly if he recalled signing any paperwork related to the company. Knox admitted he had signed a few limited power of attorney documents when asked by Mom and Dad, insisting these were minor authorizations for everyday decisions while I established myself. Grandpa made a brief call, and soon Mr. Hodes, his trusted lawyer, arrived, briefcase in hand. He opened it, revealing organized folders, and began with the primary document, a previous authorization form bearing what appeared to be my signature. Mr. Hodes highlighted the date, noting it coincided with times I was in Austin for interviews. Enlarged images revealed subtle differences in loops, angles, pressure, and slant, enough to raise questions about authenticity without declaring a mismatch. Printer forensics showed yellow dots, indicating the document was printed months after the claimed execution date. Dad suggested replacement copies often carried new print dates for archival purposes. Mom agreed, mentioning common reissues in Texas filings. Knox blamed the notary service, citing busy periods and reprinted originals with incorrect dates. Tegan proposed that routine administrative backlogs at state agencies might explain metadata discrepancies. I asked what these technical details meant for actual control of warehouses and contracts. My questions prompted extended clarifications, revealing gaps. Grandpa occasionally pressed for specifics on authorization scope. Mr. Hodes explained Texas statutes limiting proxies to stated purposes, noting overreach could prompt scrutiny. Responses overlapped defensively. Dad emphasized protective intent. Mom highlighted avoidance of early career burden. Knox said the forms ensured operational continuity without transferring permanent rights, and Tegan added that such arrangements broadly protected family assets. I asked why proxies were necessary if oversight was temporary. Explanations focused on efficiency during growth. Mr. Hodes displayed side-by-side comparisons with my bank signature cards, revealing tilt variants and connection breaks uncommon in my writing. No definitive forgery was concluded, only red flags requiring further review. The attorney suggested additional expert analysis to clarify intent. Faces tensed, Dad loosened his collar, Mom sipped water repeatedly, Knox drummed fingers, and Tegan recommended obtaining notary logs. Knox insisted this would resolve everything. I quietly expressed concern over why these steps seemed necessary, voice showing subtle hurt. Reassurances flowed faster but appeared less coordinated. Grandpa observed calmly, letting doubts settle. Evidence hovered at suspicion, creating unease without formal accusation. Mr. Hodes moved to the next set of materials, enlarged printouts of anonymous emails sent to recruiters where I had applied for entry-level logistics and management roles. The messages claimed I demonstrated poor work ethic, abandoned responsibilities mid-project, or created unnecessary team conflicts. Headers indicated temporary accounts, but server logs traced the origin to our residential IP. Knox reacted sharply, asking Mom why she had insisted he compose those messages to discourage me from pursuing distant or demanding roles. Tegan reminded him she had reviewed outgoing company mail and accidentally discovered drafts saved in Knox's personal folder, denying shared responsibility for content she never approved. Dad intervened, explaining the intent was to guide my early career towards stable, local opportunities with family support. Mom, visibly emotional, described her worry that distance could leave me unsupported. Knox countered, claiming he acted under pressure from parental concern despite personal discomfort. Tegan recalled conversations where Knox expressed confidence the approach would ultimately benefit everyone by keeping me closer. I remained quiet, absorbing each detail. Overlapping defenses revealed coordination and regret. My questions about rejected applications prompted further clarifications, exposing patterns of control. Dad's attempts to frame everything as protective lost impact against growing scrutiny and emerging accusations. Mom wiped tears, now flowing freely, repeating that her priority had always been my security and proximity. Knox dismissed these claims as excuses for excessive control, shifting responsibility to parental initiative while minimizing his own role. Tegan distanced herself further, expressing surprise at the full scope of events and disappointment that Knox had not disclosed details sooner. Grandpa watched silently. Mr. Hodes presented chronological timestamps, showing consistent patterns across multiple hiring cycles. Responses fragmented. Knox admitted drafting messages but downplayed his influence. Mom acknowledged input, but reframed it as gentle guidance. Tegan highlighted instances where messages coincided with periods she had no independent involvement. Discussion focused on assigning responsibility, with each person defending themselves while pointing out others' greater involvement. I asked targeted questions, drawing out additional timeline specifics without revealing prior knowledge. The lawyer's methodical presentation exposed divisions clearly. Log entries matched household online activity during typical evening hours. Knox admitted drafting under parental guidance, Mom insisted it stemmed from concern, and Tegan stressed her limited awareness. Dad repeatedly appealed for perspective, but conviction weakened. I noted quietly that certain rejections coincided with key career milestones, prompting hurried justifications. Tension tightened, alliances visibly strained under mutual exposure. Grandpa remained a silent observer. Exhibits stood as silent evidence of orchestrated interference. Eventually, voices tapered as exhaustion replaced defensiveness. Resentment lingered. No one admitted full responsibility. Focus stayed on interference with my career, leaving fractures beneath attempted reconciliation. Grandpa raised his hand, palm out, demanding silence. The bickering stopped immediately. His eyes were firm and his voice steady. He revealed that several months earlier, after initial suspicions from irregular reports, he had consulted professionals and updated his last will. The new document revoked all previous provisions benefiting Dad, Mom, Knox, and Tegan, designating me as sole heir of all remaining assets, including properties, investments, and trusts. Mr. Hodes quietly confirmed, sliding a certified copy across the table, notarized and fully witnessed. The attorney then presented the final evidence, forensic comparisons of the contract transferring the cold storage and logistics company to David Carter. Side-by-side overlays showed signature patterns matching Knox's authenticated samples with 99% certainty. Financial records followed, tracing substantial wire transfers from the purchaser into a joint account controlled by my parents, marked as payment for the business sale. Knox visibly slumped, confessing the scheme. The sale generated urgent capital to prevent foreclosure on Dad's struggling construction company. Tegan's role emerged. She had identified David Carter as a discreet buyer capable of rapid closure. Mom reacted with visible distress. Dad gripped the table. Tegan cried, insisting her role had been limited to the introduction, not document preparation. Grandpa calmly emphasized that the coordinated deception spanned years, interfering with my independence while exploiting the gift intended for my security. Mr. Hodes outlined relevant Texas statutes. Forgery affecting property carries serious penalties, compounded by potential fraud charges if misrepresentation induced transfer. A deliberate knock came at the door. Grandpa nodded. Two uniformed officers entered, professional and firm. They explained their arrival followed a prior complaint of suspected document fraud, supported by preliminary expert findings. One officer photographed exhibits, the other served formal summonses, first to Knox, then Dad, requiring immediate investigative interviews for alleged signature falsification and unauthorized asset disposal. Tegan sobbed openly, clutching Knox's sleeve, pleading for private resolution. Mom sank into her chair, face in her hands, quietly sobbing. Dad accepted service mechanically, eyes downcast. Knox stared at the summons, whispering fragmented apologies, citing desperation as motivation. I spoke plainly. They had prioritized preserving their lifestyle over my entrusted future, liquidating assets that were never theirs to spend. Consequences now followed without leniency. Officers advised retaining counsel and left copies and contact information. A heavy quiet settled. Holiday music from a distant speaker felt incongruous. Mom extended a trembling hand, appealing for dialogue and family healing. Dad echoed, citing pressures that clouded judgment during financial crisis. Tegan continued crying, questioning how protective intent became irreversible harm. Knox remained silent, head bowed. Grandpa methodically gathered scattered pages. Mr. Hodes secured the materials, offering measured closure remarks. I reiterated that mercy would require genuine remorse, which could not undo the damage. The evening ended in fractured aftermath, bonds irreparably severed. The officers departed into the chilly Texas night, leaving summons papers behind like final notices. A full year passed in a series of legal proceedings that tested every bit of resolve I had built. The civil lawsuit moved through depositions, discovery, and multiple court appearances in downtown Houston, where I spent hours answering questions about timelines I already knew by heart. Nights blurred into reviewing affidavits and expert reports. Sleep was fractured by concerns over whether forensic evidence would withstand defenses claiming good faith or clerical errors. David Carter's legal team successfully argued that he had purchased the company in reasonable belief of valid title, reducing recoverable damages to partial restitution rather than the full company value. The settlement eventually provided a foundation, though it fell far short of compensating for lost opportunities and growth over those stolen years. The judge's order enforced structured payments, monitored to prevent evasion. Meanwhile, my former family's world unraveled. Dad's construction business collapsed under debts and legal fees, forcing Chapter 7 liquidation that wiped out contracts and decades of reputation. Mom and Dad sold the suburban family home and moved to a modest rental apartment, leaving behind childhood memories and holiday traditions. Knox faced probation and restitution, further straining finances. Tegan filed for divorce, seeking distance from the fallout and returning to her hometown. I redirected all settlement funds into launching a smaller logistics venture, focusing on cold storage units for local producers, farmers, markets, small food distributors, and restaurants around Greater Houston. Early months were difficult. Securing clients required cold calls, trade shows, and discounted rates to build trust. Capital was stretched across warehouse leases, refrigerated trailer purchases, and payroll. Cash flow stabilized gradually through persistent networking, reliable service, repeat contracts, and inventory turnover. Grandpa Sidney relocated nearby, providing informal guidance from his long career in supplier negotiations, route optimization, and risk assessment. His advice proved invaluable without overstepping, and he occasionally joined site visits, proud as operations expanded to multiple facilities serving surrounding counties. Contact with my parents and brother ceased entirely. Occasional messages from Mom arrived via mutual acquaintances, brief apologies expressing regret and hopes for reconciliation, which I deleted unread, recognizing patterns of manipulation. Professional milestones accumulated quietly. First profitable quarter, employee retention bonuses, and positive client reviews, praising personalized service absent in larger competitors. My daily routine settled. Early warehouse checks, evening paperwork, weekend downtime, reading industry journals, or walking local trails. Grandpa's steady presence, shared meals, and discussions of market trends reinforced my choices. Financial independence became tangible, reflecting hard-earned progress rather than dependence or deceit. Reflections on that Christmas night surfaced rarely, serving as reminders rather than sources of regret. Growth continued incrementally. Additional refrigerated units, diversified driver roster, and expanded client base, reducing single-point risks. Stability felt earned, with foundations solid against future uncertainties. Grandpa often remarked on my resilience, visibly satisfied, observing the enterprise thrive under my direction. Life reshaped around authenticity, free from inherited toxicity. From my small logistics office, I began anonymously posting my story on an online forum for those financially exploited by relatives. Initially, traction was slow. A few sympathetic replies from strangers facing similar inheritance disputes or sibling fraud. One evening, I received a private message from a young woman in her mid-20s in Oklahoma. Her older brother had transferred family farmland left by their late grandmother into his name using forged documents while she was at nursing school. Over several weeks, we exchanged messages. I shared resources I had gathered: pro bono legal aid organizations, templates for filing complaints, and tips for gathering bank records without alerting the perpetrator. She updated me at each step: initial consultation, filing the civil suit for fraudulent conveyance, and mediation sessions. I stayed up late, offering encouragement when depositions shook her confidence. Eventually, her case concluded in her favor. The judge ordered title restoration and compensatory damages. She mailed a handwritten letter expressing gratitude for guidance that turned fear into actionable steps. Similar outreach followed. A man from Colorado contacted me about parents redirecting trust distributions meant for his education. A woman in Florida described an aunt liquidating shared investment accounts. I carved weekend hours for virtual consultations, reviewing uploaded documents, suggesting questions for attorneys, and explaining Texas-specific precedents that sometimes influenced multi-state cases. No fees were exchanged. Satisfaction came from seeing victims gain clarity, take control, and resolve issues. Grandpa Sidney became a regular visitor. He arrived mid-morning with coffee, settling into the office while I handled invoices or route planning. Conversations often reflected on justice and progress. He acknowledged that the path had been rockier than initial anger suggested: endless paperwork, delayed hearings, partial recoveries. Yet he emphasized growth, decision-making grounded in experience rather than reaction, and expressed pride when discussing client expansions and employee milestones. Christmas took on a completely new meaning. Decorations were minimal: a small tree on the reception desk, lights along the warehouse entrance to show staff appreciation. The date no longer carried forced gatherings or hidden agendas, serving instead as a yearly reminder to prioritize self-preservation. I began viewing family through a clearer lens. Connection now had to be earned through consistent respect, not assumed through bloodline. Forgiveness remained possible, but only for those who demonstrated real change, not repeated harm. The sting of betrayal dulled over time, replaced by purpose in helping others navigate similar challenges. Each success story reinforced my choice to sever toxic ties, creating space for healthier relationships built on mutual trust. Grandpa often noted how the ordeal had forged resilience I could never have imagined. Quiet satisfaction came from watching the business thrive on integrity, free from past shadows. The lesson became clear: deep kinship carries no automatic claim to loyalty. Protection begins internally, and boundaries are essential against those unwilling to honor them. Cutting contact was not cruelty. It enabled survival, growth, and eventual contribution beyond personal pain. Life moved forward, grounded in choices aligned with hard-earned values. Peace came not from reconciliation, but from accepting reality and committing to higher standards. Helping others became a quiet form of redemption, turning private wounds into shared strength. Grandpa's presence anchored my daily routine, his wisdom complementing operational demands. The company expanded steadily, adding refrigerated units and extending delivery across Central Texas. Community involvement grew naturally, including sponsoring food bank drives and partnering with small farms for reliable cold chain solutions. Personal fulfillment stemmed from independence achieved and purpose discovered in supporting vulnerable individuals facing familial deception. Reflection brought clarity. Blood relation guarantees nothing. Character defines worthiness. Forgiveness withheld from unrepentant betrayers protected future well being. Moving forward meant embracing self reliance, offering aid selectively, and living authentically. Though the journey was painful, it yielded maturity and direction unforeseen. Grandpa summed it up during a coffee break. Justice is sometimes incomplete, but personal evolution completes the victory. That perspective guided all decisions, business strategies, outreach, and daily outlook. Christmas became a marker of renewal, not loss, reinforcing vigilance and gratitude for chosen paths. The core truth remained private yet profound. Family earns its place. Absence of toxicity creates space for genuine connection. Life, rebuilt on solid terms, carried forward with quiet confidence.